The Rolling Rice Cakes, as told by Kevin Olette. There once was a man who was very poor. He ate very little, had rags for clothes, and lived, if you can call it that, in a small, messy, one-room apartment in the city. The reason he had such little money was he didn't have a job. He had been to university for many years and held several degrees. However, he felt that life was better enjoyed by watching it go by than by working through it. He relied on his parents to pay his rent and a meager trust fund for his food. The one luxury he afforded himself was beer. One day, while he was riding his fixed-gear bike home from the record store, a familiar ding-ding sounded from his smartphone. It was a text from his mother. She explained that she was cutting off his financial support and freezing his trust fund because couldn't he just go out and get a job already? Well, he decided to celebrate his financial independence with a picnic in the park, and he promptly went home to prepare. In his kitchen, he found no food apart from a nearly empty sack of rice and a fridge full of beer. So he decided to make some rice cakes, and he headed out. He found a dry place under his favorite tree where he could watch all the life pass by, cracked open a beer, and commenced his last supper. He fished through his rucksack and found the warm rice cakes wrapped in foil. He opened the wrapping and picked up the first rice cake, only to find it was still far too hot. He cursed softly under his breath and dropped the rice cake, shaking his fingers in the air to cool them. The man moved to catch the rice cake, but just then a pretty lady walked by and captured his attention. He looked back at the rice cake just in time to see it roll down into a hole. The hole was too small for a squirrel, but too big for a chipmunk, and the grass in front of it had a well-worn path leading out to the bike trail. Just as the man reached for the next rice cake, he heard a small but joyous uprising from the hole. The voices were squeaky and garbled, but he swore he could hear the voices chanting, rice cakes, rolling rice cakes from above." Soon the excited cries faded, and the man sat back, concerned for his own sanity. Had he really just heard voices coming from a burrow? He took the second rice cake and held it over the hole. It hovered there during his second thoughts, and then dropped in. Like a dime in a jukebox, the cake slipped down and rolled into the darkness. A second passed, then the sing-song chanting began again. Rice cakes, rolling rice cakes from above." The man cupped his ear and leaned toward the hole to make sure it wasn't a squeaking mouse or the chirping of a squashed cricket. But the man was certain it was singing he heard. He had one rice cake left, the last of his food, but he figured he would rather die of hunger than go on living without ever knowing who or what was singing. So down went the third rice cake. He listened, but it was quiet this time. Not even a squeak. He leaned back and stared at the hole in confusion. He was somewhat relieved to know his understanding of the world had not just been jarred by the presence of a tap-dancing chipmunk troupe, yet he was very much disturbed by his apparent hallucination. He took another gulp of beer. His stomach growled loudly. He was thinking maybe he was hallucinating that too when suddenly a mischievous little face sprang up from the hole. Then the body accompanying it emerged. Following that, another funny character came up, and then another. These last two were hauling up a heavy burlap sack. The man was awestruck. He had heard of hunger playing tricks on your mind, but he had never experienced anything like this before. Beads of perspiration began collecting on his forehead and mustache. Just then, the first elfin creature spoke. Hey man, that's really generous of you. All those rice cakes will keep the crew fed all winter, and you didn't even leave any for yourself. That's selfless, too. We owe you one. Here, take this as our thanks. It's not much, just a sack of rice, but it's all we can do. The man was dumbstruck, and only a few shaky guttural sounds came out as he nodded. With that, the elfin creatures disappeared back into the hole, and the man's life was forever changed. Immediately he hopped on his bike and began pedaling, but not in the direction of his apartment, just aimlessly. He was so dumbstruck by the elves, he was unsure of where to go. He didn't stop until he was out of breath, and as luck would have it, he found himself outside the local food bank, and he was struck by an idea. Inside the food bank, the man didn't get in line, but instead asked to speak to someone about volunteering. The director came out and explained that there were many caring individuals helping, so many that scheduling them was becoming a juggling act. The man revealed that he was out of a job and soon to join the food bank's clientele and would like to give back in some way. He casually mentioned his degree in economics and his MBA among his other accomplishments, and the director hired him on the spot as project coordinator. Later that night, when the man got home, he used the rice in the small sack given to him from the elves to make supper. Just enough to make 3 rice cakes. When he sat down to eat his supper, he looked with gratitude at the empty sack on the counter, thinking of the elves that helped him for helping them. But the sack wasn't empty. To his surprise, it was once again full. He went over to the counter and emptied the sack into a bowl and watched as within seconds the sack once again filled with rice. The man was hit with yet another idea. From then on, the man went along living in his modest apartment and working at the food bank, helping less fortunate neighbors through their hardships, and always happy to hand out a sack of rice to each client. The end. Rice bake. 2 eggs, 1 cup of cottage cheese, half a cup of sour cream, 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard, 3 cups of cooked brown rice, 1/3 cup of sharp cheddar or crumbled cranberry Wensleydale if you can find it, 1 teaspoon of coriander, 1 teaspoon of tarragon, 1 teaspoon of caraway seeds, 1 teaspoon of olive oil, half of a large eggplant chopped into 2 centimeter or half-inch cubes, 1 large yellow onion sliced, 2 leaves of kale chopped, 3 cloves of garlic minced. Whisk together the eggs, cottage cheese, sour cream, and Dijon in a large bowl. Sauté the onion in olive oil in a large saucepan over high heat until translucent. Add the eggplant and garlic on medium-high heat until the eggplant browns. Grease a 9 by 13 inch casserole dish with olive oil and preheat the oven to 350 Fahrenheit, 180 Celsius. Gently mix the rice into the saucepan and add the coriander, caraway seed, and tarragon. Add the egg mixture and stir until just incorporated. Place the mixture into the casserole dish and cover with tinfoil. Bake for 30 minutes covered. Uncover and top with cheese. Place under the broiler for 10 to 20 minutes, keeping an eye on it to be sure it doesn't burn. Bon appétit!